Welcome to this week's episode of Everyday Thin Places. I'm Rachel Gallagher, and I'm an interfaith hospice chaplain.
And I'm Elizabeth Ferrasso, and I'm a birth doula.
And in each episode of Everyday Thin Places, we draw from our experiences supporting birthing people and dying people to explore with honesty, authenticity, and humor how we can all become more truly living people.
All right, last week we said welcome back. Again, we're saying welcome back because this is the third episode in a small series that we put together. So if you listened last week or the week before, you will know that we have been talking about fear. We have been talking about pain, and we've hinted so often about the way that we have seen the power of ritual, how ritual can really be of assistance when a person is dealing with fear or when they're dealing with pain. And so we are going to devote this whole episode to talking about what is ritual? What are these two even talking about? What does it have to do with birth and with death and with life? So I guess it's helpful if we just start by talking a little bit about getting familiar with what we mean by ritual, because it can mean different things to different people for sure. I think if I heard the word ritualistic, to me, that always had a very negative connotation that someone is doing something ritualistic. I think I thought of people making human sacrifices or, just doing something where you're going through the motions and your heart wasn't in it.
Yeah, an empty ritual.
Yeah.
I've heard that term. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I don't think that, and I think that was because I didn't realize that my whole life I've been doing rituals. I just didn't call them that. And so I think our listeners will realize that they have a lot of rituals and that there are more rituals available to them. So, I guess when I think of what we mean by ritual, we're talking about activities or words or things that we do as humans that become very powerful to us when we do them. They might otherwise be ordinary if they were separated from a sense of meaning, but because we ascribe meaning to them, they become very powerful in our lives. So, eating turkey. Eating turkey, it's just a choice of a thing to eat. But when you eat turkey on a certain Thursday in November, I can't say the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th because I don't remember which Thursday.
Well, it depends if you're American or Canadian.
If you're American or Canadian. Well, let us be very international and say that on a Thursday in November, if you're eating turkey, that means something really different than eating turkey on a Tuesday in July.
Yeah.
Certain things that we do that we ascribe meaning to, and they become meaningful and powerful to us. So, yeah, Rachel, what else do you think of when you think of ritual?
Yeah, I think similar to what you were describing of kind of the idea of empty rituals or the idea of just misconceptions to rituals. I think of just being confused, right? I grew up in a non-religious home and my grandparents were Catholic. And so when they would come to town, I would go to Catholic church and the act of taking communion. I didn't understand the symbolism behind it. I didn't understand anything about it. And it just seemed it didn't seem like an empty ritual. It just seemed like a confusing ritual to me. But now as an adult and as a interfaith hospice chaplain, I have a better understanding. But I think of, things that you would do in a church. A lot of things that happen in church are rituals. So that's the big idea. But I also think of things that we do to mark milestones in life as rituals. And then lately, in my own life, I think about my own personal rituals of washing my hands so much more now than I ever did before. So I bring in the mail, I wash my hands. We unpack our groceries, we wash our hands. And it's become a ritual. And it's something that makes me feel better. Makes me feel like I am doing something to combat fear. So yeah, those are the things that come to mind immediately, but we've also done some thinking on this, and there's a lot to be said about rituals and the impact of them. I think rituals can be really grounding when we need to be grounded. And that's why they can be really powerful, especially surrounding birth and death, because those are times where big things are happening. And it's easy to get caught up in the fear, the pain. And so we can draw closer to rituals to help us to get through those things, to hold us in the present moment. And also, I think rituals connect us to each other, to other generations. When I do certain rituals that we have in my family, I feel connected to my ancestors who maybe I didn't even meet, but because I know that this is a ritual that's been passed down, I feel connected to them. Mm-hmm. And they can connect us to a higher power. So that example of taking communion, that's a great example of a ritual that connects us to other people, to other generations, and to a higher power. If that ritual is meaningful for you, that is a great example of the power of rituals.
Yeah, and it's something very ordinary. It's ordinary wine or juice. Mm-hmm. It's ordinary bread, but the symbolism of what it means to the person who's participating in it makes it very powerful for them. And so in birth and in death, there are certain rituals that we're really used to talking about, but I wonder if because people have the chance to hear from us going a little bit deeper, we think of baby showers, we think of funerals, there's things that off the top of everyone's head, they would say, oh, those are sort of rituals that have to do with birth and death. But where have you seen the power of ritual work well for people that are going through the process of dying, that are going through the process of saying goodbye to loved ones? Give us that deeper look into what a hospice chaplain has to say about the power of ritual.
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying that I'm not an expert on the rituals of other cultures, other religions. Being an interfaith chaplain, you kind of have like a broad overview of different faith traditions. And so I have an idea of rituals, but I'm not an expert on any of them. But, I think when a person is getting ready to die and when loved ones are getting ready for that person to die, a really simple ritual that happens a lot across many cultures, regardless of religion, regardless of belief system, is just the act of being with the person and sharing memories, sharing happy times, saying, I love you. That's a ritual that people probably don't even realize is a ritual, but it's something that's so powerful and something that I see over and over and over again that helps people to move through this act of losing a loved one.
Yeah. I wonder if you've ever seen families practice ritual in some way that you had not thought of until you encountered either their culture or just the culture of their family practicing in a way that seemed really, particularly meaningful or powerful to you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've seen that I've found to be really beautiful and that I had never really given a lot of thought to before is, when we see certain signs and symptoms, we can say this person is getting closer to dying. And as medical professionals, we're able to, not give a specific time frame for when someone will die, but give an idea. So it looks like it's going to be months to years before this person passes. Or as it gets closer, seconds to minutes or minutes to hours. And so I've seen this happen, and I don't know if it was pre-planned or if it's something that just came up that just felt like the right thing to do. But I've seen where people refuse to have the home health aide clean up their loved one, because we like to clean people up before they die. We want them to die with as much dignity as possible. And so if we know someone has hours, we'll try to get a home health aide there to clean them up. But I've seen families refuse the home health aide because they want to be the ones to provide that care for the last time.
Yeah.
And so bathing their person can become a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And the actions, the physical actions of cleaning a person, it can be very repetitive. It can be soothing.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that people think about it ahead of time, but in the moment, it seems to be really helpful. And I think that's something that you and I want to get across, is that rituals don't necessarily have to be prescribed.
Mm-hmm.
Rituals can be something that in that moment just feels like the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I feel like, Elizabeth, you might have some ideas about this.
We've talked about this. So, in birth, during labor and when a baby's born and in the days and weeks following a baby's birth, there's some things that just as a culture, we think like, oh yeah, well, you're going to have a baby shower. I even tell people when they're in my birth class, this is a rite of passage that you're in this birth class. We've seen people in TV and movies taking their birth class.
Yeah.
And so you have this idea of what it's going to be like. One of the rituals that I think of that people ascribe a lot of meaning to is cutting of the umbilical cord. That this cord that has attached mother and baby for this whole time of the baby's growth, that has sustained the baby by bringing nutrients and bringing oxygenated blood to the baby, and that's taking waste away. It's the connection that mother has to the baby. And so when the baby's born, and the baby doesn't need that connection anymore, and they clamp and cut that cord, oftentimes it's the baby's father or another birth partner, another important person in their life is the one that cuts that cord. I always have to give people instruction in birth class. It doesn't snip easily. It's like cutting raw chicken. And so we prepare people for that ritual because there's something meaningful to be able to be the one to say, these are two separate people that can go different ways and do different things now when they could not be separated before this point. And so some of those are really sort of prescribed rituals. We feel like we should do them. We should take a class. We should have a baby shower. We should make a big deal out of this cutting of the umbilical cord. But what I see, and this is really what I think of when I think of the power of ritual, is that people in labor tend to stumble upon spontaneous rituals that work for them. And so when I'm defining the word ritual for people in my birth class, I'm talking about something that you just recognize that you're doing because it's kind of working for you. And labor's feeling really overwhelming. And all of a sudden that you realize that when you're tapping your hands in a certain way, or when you're doing this certain utterance, or when you have a certain motion or a position, it feels like I'm having a sense of control. I'm having a sense of maintaining my ability to cope when things are getting really difficult and really demanding. And so it can be a repetition of someone saying, mama, 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 mama. And whenever the peak of the contraction comes, I remember a woman who I supported that she just very spontaneously would say, mama, 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 mama. And so when her labor was, as it progressed and she would reach the peak of her contraction, I would say, go back to your mamas. And she would go, mama, 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 and just kind of regain that sense of control when she had that. Another woman I remember that she just needed to be holding her husband's hand with her arms straight up at a 90-degree angle. And so every time when the contraction would come, she would grab his hand and she would put her arms straight up in the air. And when one contraction came, he wasn't quite paying attention. And she said, hand. He said, what? Hand. She needed his hand. And I said, give her your hand. She needs your hand. Because there's a sense of, as you said, anchoring or grounding that comes from when I can repeat this action, it gives me a sense of control. I tell people my story of ritual of not during birth, but running a race. If you're from Philadelphia, you know about the Broad Street Run. And so I remember running the Broad Street Run, which is a 10-mile run.
Humble brag.
Humble brag. I shuffle through the Broad Street Run is a more accurate depiction. And there was one year where even though it is the first Saturday in May, it should not be 80 degrees at 10 o'clock in the morning the first Saturday in May, but this year it was that hot. And so it was especially hard. I am not a good runner. I am not a good hot weather runner, barely moving. And so I remember getting to mile 7 and my one arm is sort of going back and forth the way that you expect somebody to have their arm moving when they ran. But my other arm was doing this motion where I was like, what am I doing? I'm like stirring a pot. And so I did this motion of like, stirring a pot. I'm stirring a pot. Okay. All right. I can do this. I can stir the pot. Let me just keep stirring the pot till I get to South Street. All right. All right. The next one, can I keep stirring the pot till I get to Washington Ave? Stir the pot all the way to Snyder Ave, stir the pot all the way to the Navy Yard to where I'm finished. And just sometimes these repetitive motions, when we get in these really demanding situations, it gives us a sense of applying rhythm to another overwhelming situation. How long is this going to take? I don't know. But if I can apply rhythm to it with some sort of ritual, I can feel a little bit of a better sense of control. And so to me, that applies to life all the time. Yeah. Whenever something feels overwhelming, can I start my day with my cup of coffee and light a couple of candles and sit down and write out my thoughts without any censor? And then that's a really good way to start my day, no matter what I have in that day, if I can start out my day that way. And so these really intense thresholds of life, of birth and death, obviously we need this power of ritual. But I think what we want is for people to realize that in these tiny little silly actions, like stirring the pot when you run or having a certain vocalization, or these really big things like caring for your loved one's body, as they're getting ready to pass. It's just, it's really the stuff of being human. It's such a rich, important part of life. And we don't want to miss the beauty of what that is.
Yeah. As I was thinking through this episode and what I wanted to say and questions that I have about rituals, I started thinking about rituals in my own life. Like what are my current rituals? And I think probably like most people, it took me a minute to settle in and think about what rituals really are. And like I said, washing my hands has become a ritual lately. And just like what you said, coffee. And I made a list of the current rituals in my life. So washing my hands, coffee. I like to take baths as a way to kind of just pause. If I'm feeling really stressed or overwhelmed, I know that I need to just take a bath and have some quiet time. And in the bath, you can't really do much other than take a bath.
Yeah.
You can read a book, right? You could listen to a podcast, but you're kind of forced to just be present in your bath. Riding the Peloton is a ritual for me. And I was thinking, like, what's the difference between routine and ritual? And I think intention can be a difference. So Peloton is part of my routine, but it's really important to me. And I don't work for Peloton, but I will say that a lot of the classes that I take on Peloton are really motivating, and the instructors give a lot of wisdom. Life wisdom. And so really setting that time apart in my day, knowing that this is time where it's just me and the instructor and I'm going to take in whatever they have to give, makes it more of a ritual to me than a routine. It's more than just exercising to exercise. And I want to make that a goal for myself, to make my routines more of a ritual. So yeah, coffee for me is a routine and a ritual, but how can I make it more of a ritual? How can I savor the flavor of my coffee, the warmth of the cup? I feel like I am connecting. This is so weird, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but I was thinking about this. I'm connecting with my neighbor across the street sometimes when I'm having my coffee, because there's a certain time in the morning when he comes out and sits in his doorway and smokes a cigar and drinks, I presume, coffee. And we don't know each other. We've never even spoken. But I feel like we're sharing this ritual together. Yeah. I'm having this ritual of morning coffee with my neighbor who I don't know yet.
Yeah.
So I think that's beautiful.
It makes sense. So it's that sense of connectedness that we can do things with other people. And I think that's where we recognize that we've talked before about when it comes to fear and when it comes to pain, the sense of despair and suffering comes from a sense of being alone. Mm-hmm. But when we can normalize pain by talking about it, by you having the same kind of pain that someone else has experienced, or when you can not be left alone in a place of fear, then that is so powerful. So rituals draw us closer to other people.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said about lighting a candle in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like sharing a little bit more? Like when you're lighting a candle, what does that do for you?
Yeah. For me, there's something about like the beauty of fire. I think that, you could just watch a candle burn, and I love the smell of candles. So I love to have candles that smell good. I like to change them with the seasons. And so recently, I was opening my drawer of my big buffet that I keep in my dining room that has all my stash of candles. And I just caught a whiff of my fall scented candles. And I was like, I was in fall. And I remember, I was so sad. I remember how it felt great it was to put all the kids on the bus and send them to school and have my time by myself. And that's not happening this year. But, different scents help to remind me of the passage of time and kind of help to place me, here's where I am. And something about lighting that candle is, it helps. I do have to keep them up high where none of my children can get them, but there's something very grown up to me about lighting a candle. You're not allowed to use matches or light candles until a certain age. And so this is my grown up, set apart me time as a person, as an individual, as a part of the whole human family. Like those are all the different things that I get out of that. So candles are really special to me. I guess this is where we can tell people a little bit. We had promised that we were going to share about our own ritual that we have for starting each episode of our podcast. And so we're sitting here right now with a candle burning, and I'm smelling it, and there's a sense of comfort and the idea of we are hopefully shining a light that other people can see, that other people can enjoy, and a little bit of a comforting sense of setting apart our time from all the rest of the busyness of life. So, you don't light a candle when you're checking emails.
Right.
In most cases, you light a candle when you're going to dip into that bathtub, or when you're going to sit down with a good book, or when you have company coming over and you're having a really special dinner. And so to me, candles set apart that time. And that's why my favorite thing of the year is to have, in the winter when everybody starts lighting candles, and in churches where you have a candlelight service. That's just like the best. I remember that from growing up. It's a special part of growing up. And also, even as an adult, I love to have Christmas candlelight service.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really special to me too. In college, a big tradition or ritual at my small university was the Christmas candlelight concert that the concert choir put on every year. And it was such a big deal. Like, it would sell out every single night, every single year. They would have to add dates. You would think that those of us in concert choir were like big deal rock stars, the way that this thing sold out, but it just became such an important ritual in the community.
It's the candles. Candles are magical.
Yeah. And and then as an adult, those Christmas candlelight concerts, I remember, or Christmas candlelight services at churches. I remember the year that I was sick, I left, Philadelphia. I left the tour that I was doing and I found myself back in my hometown and felt totally disconnected from all of my friends in Philly and from my life that I had started to build. And I was back in my hometown, but nothing was the same as it used to be. And I just felt so discombobulated and I was sick and it was just a weird time. And my mom and my brother and I decided to check out a Christmas candlelight service at the local church. We had never been to the church. We didn't know anybody that went there, but it was like this ritual that we knew we could connect with, even though it wasn't necessarily, quote, our church.
Yeah.
And then moving back to Philly, that always became an important part of my year. I worked at a church for a while, and a big part of my job was planning events, and the Christmas candlelight service was like a huge, big deal for me every year. And I have a great story about candles and the love of candles. So another ritual that exists in churches is the act of confession. And a lot of times when people would ask me, like, so what do you do at that church that you work at? Like, what is your job even? And I would be like, I plan events. I do this Christmas candlelight service. I help pray with people. You know, I was trying to explain all the things that I did. And a lot of times a story that I will tell is that I also hear confessions. And the best confession story that I have is one year after our Christmas candlelight service, I got a call from a person in a woman in our congregation who said, Rachel, I just really need your help with something. And this might sound really weird, but I need you to do me a big favor. My 3-year-old was at the Christmas candlelight service and decided to steal her candle from the service. And she hid it from us. And we really want to teach her that it's not okay to hide things from her parents, that it's not okay to steal things. She had taken this candle and put it in her shoe in order to hide it from her parents. Made it all the way home, never said a word. It was her little secret. And the candle must have been really special to her. I like to think that perhaps the service was really special to her. And so she made it home with this candle. And when her parents discovered it, they thought, what are we going to do? How are we going to teach her that this is just not okay? How are we going to get this across to her? This isn't the first time that she's snuck something from us and hidden it. So Rachel, can you hear confession from our 3-year-old? Can I bring her in and have her confess to you? And then, you just talk to her about the importance of not hiding things from her parents and not stealing. And hopefully that can drive this message home. And it was just so precious and such a privilege in my job. And I just love telling that story, when describing what my work was when I worked at the church.
Maybe that child is the offspring of someone else who really appreciates candles.
It was your kid.
It was my kid. I was the mom, and that was my kid. I remember when I found her with the candle. I'm like, how did you get this home? I had it in my shoe. So, so she walked. I guess she had to really disguise how she was walking, that we couldn't tell that she had this candle hidden in her shoe the whole time. That was a favorite. And the other part of that story is that I had, let's see, if it was Christmas, then I had a baby who was not even 2 months old yet. So I was dragging her in the car seat and the 3-year-old to come see Pastor Rachel
to hear
a confession about we should not take candles from the church. If you want to be grown up and be a part of some of the special things that grown up people get to do, like light candles or have special jobs participating in the Christmas service, we need to have trust. And so, and she has grown up to be an amazing, fantastic 11-year-old who, to the best of my knowledge, has not continued to steal candles or anything from any places that she's not supposed to. I think that's a story that bonds us. That's probably why we have to have a candle burning as our ritual for our podcast recording. It really does bring it all together. So I think there are some really somber times, though, that people find that consolation. Some people will light a candle and pair that with a prayer, a sense of, I'm sending this up. And we talked a little bit about how in some of the hardest parts of your job, you have had to rely upon ritual, and you got some really good advice about not just candles, but some other things. Would you share that?
Yeah. So, I do love my job. I am privileged to do it, but I am present for a lot of the hardest stuff in life. And beyond my job as a hospice chaplain, I've experienced some trauma, mostly other people's trauma, but I've been present for it. And I've had to find ways to work through that, and ritual has been an important part of that. So, a couple years ago, I was doing what's called clinical pastoral education, and it's something that chaplains do as part of training. I was doing it at a local hospital and experienced just a really, really tough trauma. It had made all the local news. It was something that ended very tragically. And after helping the family and staff through that ordeal, I found myself really having difficulty coping with life, not being able to make sense of what had happened, not being able to sleep at night, just being torn apart. And so I went to my CPE supervisor and we talked about it. And he recommended some rituals that proved to be very helpful. So one thing was to light a candle and to kind of light it intentionally on behalf of the family that experienced this huge trauma. And in doing that, we talk about holding people in the light and holding space for people. I feel like that's a very tangible way to hold space for people and to hold them in the light, is to actually physically light a candle. So I found that to be helpful. And then also a ritual that he recommended that I hadn't thought about before was to take a piece of paper and write the person's name on it and any other thoughts or information that I wanted to write on the paper. It could just be their name, and to fold it up and to put it in a box or to put it in a jar. And just to recognize that in doing this action, I'm putting this away. It doesn't mean I can never go back to it, but I'm putting it away for now in a safe space. And I can do whatever I want to with it later, but this doesn't need to take up my energy right now. And I found that to be really helpful. And I think that's something that I'll probably carry throughout my work as a chaplain and probably throughout my life as a human. So if that can help anybody out there who's dealing with grief or trauma, I hope that you'll at least give it a try, because it's been helpful for me.
Yeah. I think we want people to feel like a ritual is very accessible.
Yeah.
That any simple thing you do with intention can help us cope well, thrive even through the hardest parts of being a human. And you know what I would like to do in our show notes? I know we've talked about the beauty of so many different kinds of rituals that exist out there, that different cultures. I would like to include some of my favorites, and you also include some of your favorites, some favorite birth rituals, some favorite death rituals that we have sort of discovered that we just don't have time to talk about now, and encourage people I think it can be very inspiring to sort of understand what some other cultures do, what some people do when they put a lot of thought and intention and maybe have brought a ritual across many, many generations. And not to say that we are going to colonize or appropriate anyone else's rituals, but to empower people to feel free to explore and to see what resonates and to discover what are some ways that you can introduce some new things into your daily life, or what are some ways that you can slow down, be present, apply some meaning to ordinary things like washing your hands you've mentioned. And it's not just washing your hands to get rid of germs, but to be able to maybe wash your hands and say, these hands have held other people's hands. These hands will hold a stranger's hand to shake them again one day, and give yourself a sense of hopeful expectation, even in a time where we're not walking around shaking people's hands. So we just want people to feel excited and inspired and empowered to make the most out of rituals that they're already aware of, and to create some new ones that fit the needs that they have and in the life that they're living right now.
Thanks for joining us. Now it's our turn to hear from you. So would you do us a big favor and go into your podcast app and rate us? Even better, would you write us a glowing review? That will help other listeners to find us. And make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode.
You can also visit our website at everydaythinplaces.com, where you will find all sorts of fun and interesting information, as well as learn about how you can help to support this podcast and earn special exclusive perks. There you will also find links to follow us on social media, or else just pop directly over to Instagram or Facebook, where you will find us at Everyday Thin Places. Thanks so much for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Rachel. Bye.